Dr. Jacoby has a doctorate in ministry from Drew University and is the principal instructor for the Athens Institute of Ministry. He's lectured in over 80 nations. Dr. Jacoby is the author of books such as True and Reasonable, Reasons for Faith in an Age of Doubt, and Genesis, Science and History, a faith-building look at the opening chapters of Genesis. Dr. Shermer, with a PhD in History of Science from Claremont Graduate School, is the founding publisher of Skeptic Magazine. He's also a monthly columnist of Scientific American and has authored books such as Why Darwin Matters, The Case Against Intelligent Design, and How We Believe, Science, Skepticism, and the Search for God. And without further ado, Accent is proud to present Dr. Douglas Jacoby and Dr. Michael Shermer.
It's great to be here. Thank you. Thank you so much for taking the evening out. I hope you can see me and you can see the screen, which is very important in this opening session. It's great to be back in my home state, Florida, and it's good to be at the university where my sister and brother attended, and where actually I have a son and daughter. One of my daughters and my son are both here as students as well. And it's a very encouraging audience. You can feel the electricity in the air. I don't know if that's a remnant, a residue of what happened, the brutality I witnessed on Saturday or not with Kentucky. But we are tonight gathered to talk about evolution. This is an important subject. It's all about life and death in a way, but I must make this qualification at the very beginning. It is not a matter of life and death. That is, what your particular view is on this does not determine your worth as a person. If you're a person of faith, whether you're an old earth or young earth, creationist, intelligent design advocate, theistic evolutionist, it doesn't really matter. It's not a matter of salvation. Scripturally, this is something that only a very small fraction of the Bible even addresses. But it is important. And you may have your mind changed. You may be swayed by some things that you hear tonight. I've certainly changed my mind on things in the past. And I believe that having an open mind is part of the fun. I need to ask you a couple questions, and I think this will help both of us tonight as we present. How many of you enjoy science? I mean, you not just enjoy it, but I mean, you watch it on TV. You would be just as likely to watch a documentary. You might watch Michael Shermer, but you have the love for... Okay, that's great. How many of you have read Darwin? And I mean, you've read at least The Origin of Species cover to cover. Not excerpts, you've read the whole book. Okay, Michael, we have about 25 people here in the audience who've done that, and that's more than normal. Last question, yes. The last question is, how many of you are open to the possibility that there is a God who used evolution to bring life into existence and to alter it over a period of time? How many of you are open to that idea? It looks like about half the crowd. My position, which I will defend, is that the scientific evidence, particularly from evolutionary biology, is fully consistent with the existence of a creator and, in fact, strongly suggests it. But first, I need to frame it. Let's give a little bit of history. The early church, and we'll go as quickly as we can, from the beginning in 30 AD, through the Middle Ages, even up to the Enlightenment, had two views. There was the more common view, which was that the earth is very young, the days of Genesis are literal days, but there was a view that many writers also espoused very early on, that the earth is older, that the days of Genesis are not literal. What happened eventually, particularly in the 18th century, with the science of geology and paleontology, Christian thinkers realized that based on stratigraphy, the earth is certainly much older than they thought. It's not thousands, it's hundreds of thousands, or millions. They were off still by several orders of magnitude. But I think this is important because many people think that, well, it was Darwin who convinced the world that the world was old. No, everyone already believed that. Churchmen, scientists alike, everyone believed that the earth was very ancient indeed. Darwin was an incredible writer. I asked you in part, how many of you had read Origin of Species, because when I first read it, which was in 1984, I was very impressed by two things: the thoroughness of the man, and in addition to the thoroughness, I was impressed by his humility. I mean, how many writers say, well, this looks like a big weakness in my argument, and I hope we find an answer to it, or this is another weak spot, but we need to consider this. There's a humility. That is the actual full title of the book, which back then, if you didn't want to read the book, you just read the cover, and it was almost as long as the book itself. There you go. So Darwin's Origin is published in 1859. And he wasn't the first one to suggest the notion of evolution. His grandfather wrote a famous book on that called Zoonomia. Even some ancient Greeks believed in it. But he was the first to propose a mechanism, that being natural selection, to explain how it actually might have worked. I think we can't rehearse all the science, at least I can't in my opening here, but we're familiar with the general idea. This is long before Watson and Crick. This is even before Mendel, so the science of genetics is unknown at this point. I would like to call your attention, though, to a conversation that Darwin had with one of the Dukes of Argyll. And this is this is near the end of his life. And the Duke asked him, when you look at the creation, aren't you sometimes impressed that there's a mind behind it, that there's a God, an intelligence behind it? Look at Darwin's reaction, which the Duke says, I shall never forget. Well, that often comes over me with overwhelming force. But at other times, and Darwin shook his head vaguely, it seems to go away. This man was not an atheist. He's misrepresented if he's called that. In fact, this is something he said just 3 years before his death. It seems to me absurd that a man may be to doubt that a man may be an ardent theist and an evolutionist. They aren't necessarily contradictory. Well, how did Christians respond to Darwin's dangerous idea? What was the reaction? Was it, as often portrayed, that all true believers resisted him and they were totally outnumbered by the mean scientists? Well, no, one reason it wasn't true is that most of the scientists were Bible believers themselves. In fact, his most ardent supporters were people in the church, from the Archbishop of Canterbury to university professors like Kingsley, to Asa Gray, a Harvard botanist who Darwin trusted as one who understood him more than anyone else. They didn't see eye to eye on everything, but Asa Gray, he respected, and they communicated cordially. Henry Drummond. Now, you've heard of Moody Bible Institute. This is Moody's associate. He believed in evolution. You've heard of Moody Blues. You've heard of something, okay? This guy. Huxley. Now, Huxley, we're going to come back to in just a little bit. He is called Darwin's bulldog because he took this idea and he ran with it, and he was a bit mean about it. That's a kind of a mean icon to use down here in Gatorland, I suppose. But what Huxley really got going was the conflict model, the warfare model. That is, you have to decide between the old earth and the Bible. You've got to decide between evolution and God. And that was not the direction things were going, but he pushed that. Eventually, we have more and more polarization. We have the rise of fundamentalism in the early years of the last century. And the fundamentals, interestingly, the foundational documents, 3 of the contributors themselves were evolutionists. So at that point, at least in 1915, there was nothing wrong in many people's thinking with being an evolutionist and a fundamentalist at the same time. Did you know that? But we have this sense of a war. There's a conflict. It's a wrestling match. Young Earth Creationism, which has its genesis with a book in 1961 called The Genesis Flood, which basically says that all the fossils, what we see in geology, is all accounted for by the flood of Noah. Whitcomb and Morris. This movement has certainly made a lot of people think. It's even been in the courts. We have court cases. It's almost non-existent outside the United States. That may sound very funny to you, but for me, 3 weeks ago I was speaking in Croatia. And in Croatia, they asked me to speak on Genesis, so I did. I was a preacher for 20 years. This is a non-issue. I spoke in Vietnam earlier this year on the same topic. It's no big deal. In the United States, it's a big deal because things are very charged, very polarized. It's like a boxing match. You know, what's going to happen? In the last 20 years, we have intelligent design. The idea that if there's a gap, if there's something that we cannot explain in terms of irreducible complexity, that means we must bring God in. And I think that this is misguided fundamentally, though it does make you think. Now, please don't get me wrong. Absolutely, I'm a creationist. Absolutely. I believe there's an intelligent designer. But intelligent design is not the only alternative here. It's not the only thing on the table, even though we have the conflict model. There are actually multiple different ways to... Okay, excellent. There are actually a number of different views of creationism and evolution out there. And if we had more time, we would explain them all. One that's the dominant position of thinkers and scientists and particularly believers is what's called creationary evolutionism. For example, some years ago, I was leading a Bible discussion at the National Institutes of Health. Most of the people who came had this view. In other words, God used evolution. God used evolution. That makes most sense. And these people did not disbelieve in the Bible. They accepted about cosmology, biology, even ecology, that we have a responsibility to take care of the creation. They accept the fall of man, the atonement, and so forth. But one thing that is often ignored by others is their appreciation for the non-literal parts of Scripture. Did you know that over 1/3 of the Bible is poetry? Psalms, Proverbs, the prophets, and many other parts. You have parables. Now, which of you would say, well, unless the Samaritan really did rescue a man who fell to the hand of thieves on the Jericho road, unless it literally happened in history, Jesus was a liar, and either it happened or it didn't. No, that would be a wrong way to approach the whole thing. And even Genesis 1 itself shows certain marks of poetry. Now, I like the way Galileo put it, Galileo Galilei. He said this: the Holy Spirit intended to teach us in the Bible how to go to heaven, not how the heavens go. You remember, he was having a conflict with the Catholic Church. It was really a political conflict more than a scientific one. But what about this conflict model? This idea that you have to choose between one and the other. I was reading Dawkins's book, The God Delusion. He says, well, which is it? Is it the anthropic principle, or is it creation? Well, why can't it be both? Why not both? You say, well, is that person an engineer, or is it a woman? Well, what kind of prejudice do you have? Why can't it be both? Cobb County, Georgia, that's where I live. From 02 to 05, they had stickers in the science textbook saying, evolution is a theory, not a fact. What is driving this? What is driving this? Part of it, I think, is an anti-religious bias in the people who are in charge of education. But we also have people who pour kerosene on the fire. Richard Dawkins, the most articulate, colorful exponent of evolution there ever was. But look what he says. It's absolutely safe to say that if you meet someone who claims not to believe in evolution, that person is ignorant, stupid, or insane. Did you get that? Those are strong words. In other words, you're intellectually dwarfed. You're a midget. I mean, who are you, puny brain, if you don't accept that? Hitchens. And he's even stronger in a way. I mean, religions run out of justifications. His book, his latest book, God is Not Great, God with a small g, because he won't even capitalize the name, how religion poisons everything. It's not just on the secular side, it's on the religious side. Expelled came out earlier this year, 2008, and Expelled overstates. Actually, Michael Shermer is in the film. Very interesting. But it goes too far. It's too one-sided. Henry Morris, who died 2 years ago, head of the Creation Research Institute, says there are only two basic worldviews. There's no evidence that the world is old. Now, I wrote to him. I wrote to him some years ago. He wrote me back, to his credit. But I wanted engagement about the actual issue. Before, when I was a young earth creationist, I read 150 books and pamphlets and articles by Morris and by his friends. And I wanted some engagement. That's what I need. Interestingly, you'd never know this. Michael and I were both drawn into young earth creationism. We were both young earth creationists back in the 70s, and ardent. And I think we did our best to support it. Now, Michael, I'm taking a shot at you, but you go second, so it's not really that bold of me. You said in your book, How We Believe, which you gave to me at last year's debate. I appreciate that. I love the book. You said the fossil record screams out evolution, not creation. Well, why not both? 10 pages later, you say, the whole point of faith, in fact, is to believe regardless of the evidence, which is the very antithesis of science. But that's not the point of faith. Faith involves trust, but faith is also a response to evidence, Hebrews 11:1. A few months ago, I took my wife to the opera. We liked that song, Nessun Dorma. We liked Turandot, so I took her to the opera. Now, to confess to you, today when I was driving to Gainesville, I was listening to bluegrass. But I was more sophisticated then. So I'm listening to opera, and someone says, oh, you were deceived. It wasn't music. It was simply sound waves. See, the equations of wave propagation explain it all. That came into your auditory canal, the tympanic membrane, and converted into some kind of pulse that traveled up into your brain. You thought it was music. It wasn't music at all. It was just sound waves. Well, would we say that person may be right on the acoustic side, but totally wrong as far as what music is? We've got to move away from the conflict model. What does the Bible actually say? Psalm 19 says that God has two books. He speaks to us through nature. He speaks to us through His Word. And these books don't contradict each other. That's where I'm coming from. If we've got a conflict, we better work on that. You'd say, okay, what does Genesis say? Doesn't that say instantaneous creation? No. If that does, then Isaiah 43 has Israel being created instantly. Same verb. Actually, a process that took hundreds of years, and the truth is God's normal way. Whether it's plate tectonics or photosynthesis, nuclear fusion, forestation, crystal growth is through processes. A snowflake occurs naturally if the conditions are right, and yet God does it. We're fearfully and wonderfully made, Psalm 139, and yet it's a process we all go through. It's not instantaneous. If I had time, I would tell you about Genesis 4, which seems to imply that there was an outside world, which Cain found. The point is, you can be a scientist and believe in God. And many scientists, in fact, do believe in God. From Francis Collins, head of the Genome Project, the preeminent scientist of the United States, to Owen Gingerich of Harvard, the astronomer, even Stephen Jay Gould, who died some years ago, was an agnostic. But please listen to what he says. Either half my colleagues are enormously stupid, or else the science of Darwinism is fully compatible with conventional religious beliefs. Even Billy Graham, this will shock some people. He said that, well, God created man, whether by evolution or not, is irrelevant. It doesn't change the fact that God created man. Whichever way God did it makes no difference. Let's move towards a conclusion right now. The existence of the universe is highly unlikely. The life coming to the universe itself is very unlikely, as many scientists agree. So what makes best sense of the evidence? Evolution that's aimless, that is dysteleological, or evidence or evolution that's guided by God or originally set up by God, teleological? That's the question. Human consciousness and intelligence, what makes more sense? That they came from a world that lacks consciousness and intelligence, or that a conscious and intelligent creator is behind them? And these days, some people will say, well, we have parallel universes. String theory. Michael, in your book, you talk about why Darwin matters. 10 to the 500th power universes, baby universes popping into existence out of black holes, oscillating universes as quantum foam, natural selection of universes a la Smolin. What is going on? We're moving into metaphysics. And I say, if it's acceptable to postulate a hypothetical universe, it's certainly acceptable to postulate a God. Michael, you said maybe our universe simply popped into existence out of the quantum fluctuation of the vacuum of some larger multiverse. Yeah, maybe. Maybe our universe is just one of those things that happen for no reason at all. Do you really believe that? And I'm not just talking, I'm talking to everybody. Do you really think that it just happened for no reason at all, that the whole cosmos is dysteleological, there's no direction? We can boil it down in the words of the famous African proverb, no rain, no mushrooms, no God, no world. This is my position.
Thank you, Doctor. You can just leave it. Dr. Shermer, at your start, you have 20 minutes.
Good evening. How we doing? Thank you, Andrew, for that kind introduction. Thank you to Access for bringing us here and to the university. I read on the internet today, so it must be true, that this is the biggest party school in America. So I went to Neiman Marcus. I bought a new suit. I got the Sarah Palin collection today. Do you like it? Yes. I got my tax refund. So I'm the publisher of this magazine, Skeptic Magazine. We investigate claims to paranormal, pseudoscience, fringe groups, and cults, and claims of all kinds between good science, junk science, voodoo science, pseudoscience, pathological science, non-science, and plain old nonsense. And unless you've been abducted by aliens and been on Mars for the last couple decades, you know there's a lot of it out there. Nonsense, that is. That is, we debunk things, but let's face it, there's a lot of bunk out there, so somebody has to do it, so that's part of our job. And these are a few of our last couple issues, by the way. There's a couple of clipboards going around. You can sign up for the free electronic version of Skeptic Magazine. Every week we send out free articles and reviews and whatnot. For example, we did one on global warming. Those are drawings, not photographs of polar bears. We did one on 9/11 conspiracy theories. That is, was 9/11 a conspiracy? Yes, it was. By definition, 19 Al-Qaeda members flying planes into buildings constitutes a conspiracy, but no, that's not what the 9/11 truthers think. They think it was an inside job by none other than the Bush administration. This, the most incompetent presidency they believe we've ever had, somehow managed to pull off the most elaborate, incredible conspiracy of all time. And so the one-liner on that is, you know how we know 9/11 was not orchestrated by the Bush administration? Because it worked. Anyway, so the problem with not understanding biology, and especially evolutionary biology, was well captured in this little film clip. Captured a moment in a shopping mall on Rodeo Drive in Southern California. So if we can have the volume up here for my audio. Biology.
Mom, I really like this.
Cute.
What's it made of?
Wool.
Like from a cow?
Uh-huh.
Duh, Ashley. All wool comes from a cow.
Does cashmere come from a cow too? Uh-huh.
The boy cow or the girl cow?
If there's any place that could really use a county fair, it's LA.
The boy cow. Oh, okay.
Oh, you mean the one with the...
With the tusks.
The LA County Fair. Kinder, simpler, funner.
So you think people believe weird things in Florida? You should come to California. Oh, it's bad. So what I'm going to try to do here is capture a little bit of evolutionary biology for you. I wrote a book on this, on why Darwin matters. This, by the way, is my first and only book. I've gotten away with full frontal nudity on the cover, which tells you that although we share a lot of DNA there, we can still tell the difference. And the question I think on the table is life naturally designed or intelligently designed? That is it supernatural top-down design versus natural bottom-up design? All intelligent design arguments go like this. It doesn't matter what the specific one is, I'll give you a few, but they go like this. X looks designed. I can't think of how X was designed naturally, therefore X was designed supernaturally. This is what we call the God of the Gaps argument. It was used effectively here in my favorite cartoon from Sidney Harris, where he writes on the chalkboard there, then a miracle occurs, and the other scientist says, I think you need to be a little more explicit here in step 2. It's not that you're not allowed to invoke miracles in science, it's just that there's nothing to do with the concept. It's just a word, a linguistic placeholder that says, I don't know what it is, so we'll call it a miracle, the supernatural, the paranormal, whatever. These are just linguistic placeholders until we actually have a real explanation, which is what science does. And that's the only reason we don't invoke miracles. There's just nothing to do to test them. So, for example, in his great work, the Principia Mathematica, the great Isaac Newton concluded at the end of his work, because he could not explain what's called the problem of the planes, as is all the planets are in the plane of the ecliptic. They all go in the same direction on this flat plane, except for Pluto, which is no longer a planet, so it's not a problem. But he concluded that, therefore, this most beautiful system of sun, planets, and comets could only proceed from the counsel and dominion of an intelligent and powerful being. But no one makes that argument anymore. Creationists and intelligent design theorists and theologians don't use Isaac Newton's quote, even though he's one of the greatest scientists of all time. Why not? Because the gap has been filled. We have a perfectly cogent scientific explanation for how solar systems are formed out of condensing clouds of interstellar gas and so forth. So that's the fate of hooking your faith to a particular gap in scientific knowledge. What are you going to do when the gap is filled? Because that's what happens in the history of science. In any case, to invoke a designer based on these kinds of arguments, that is, if the world is complex, it looks intricately designed, and therefore the best inference is that there must be an intelligent designer. By the same logic, we should infer that an intelligent designer must itself have been designed by a superior intelligent designer. And by this reasoning, any designer who can create a superior intelligent designer must itself be a super superior intelligent designer, which itself must have been created by a super duper superior intelligent designer ad infinitum. So in other words, invoking at some point, at any point, an intelligent designer in the process explains absolutely nothing, because it's just a linguistic placeholder. And how do you explain the origins of that designer and all the way back? And so we end up with an infinite regress, and it gets us nowhere when we're doing science. So on the specific evolution wars, always featured on the cover of magazines, because they do invoke this idea that there must be some conflict between science and religion, often featured in editorial cartoons with the creationists claiming the earth is only 10,000 years old, or you're now leaving Kansas and becoming evolved again, or W on the boot there as an intelligent designer, or warn the neighbors the carnival's back in town. Creationism in the masquerading in the wool of intelligent design being run by the religious right. These are fodder for cartoonists, like the whole idea of teach both theories, creation and evolution. Well, wait, then we better teach chemistry and alchemy. We better teach phrenology and neurology. We better teach magic and physics. We better teach astrology and astronomy. So once you open the door to say, well, there's two positions on every side, then you open the door to this kind of argument. Or this from BC, if man evolved from the ape, how come there are still apes around? Some of them were given choices. Well, BC was done by a creationist, by the way, but it really is tapping into something that I think was well captured by one of the Dover residents in the famous Dover trial of 2006. That I definitely would prefer to believe that God created me than that I'm the 50th cousin to a silverback ape. I think this well captures what bothers people. You mean we're like one of them? Those guys at the zoo? Ooh, that just sort of has a creepy value to it. And yet the fact is, we do share much of our DNA that's unmistakable. Sorry. I'm actually reasonably conservative on many respects. It's just that it's just good fodder for humor. So the fact is, we share 98% of our genes with our chimp cousins. And in fact, instead of my invoking it as Mr. Skeptic, I'll quote from Francis Collins, the author of this book, The Language of God. Francis Collins was the head of the Human Genome Project, the public version of the Human Genome Project. And he wrote a book about why he believes in God. And he argues that human evolution occurred, all evolution occurred. And the facts are right there in the DNA itself, in the sequence similarity between us and chimpanzees, dogs, mice, chickens. It provides powerful support for Darwin's theory of evolution. That is, descent from a common ancestor with natural selection operating in randomly occurring variations. He continues, Francis Collins, who describes himself, by the way, as an evangelical, born-again Christian. Within the genome, Darwin's theory predicts that mutations that do not affect function, namely those located in junk DNA, will accumulate steadily over time. Mutations in the coding region of genes, however, are expected to be observed less frequently, since most of these will be deleterious. And only a rare such event will provide a selective advantage and be retained during the evolutionary process. And that, in fact, is exactly what is observed. So you have a prediction and an experiment or observation, and it either confirms or it rejects the observation of the hypothesis, and that's how science works, and that's why evolutionary biology is a science. In addition to DNA, we have extensive fossil record. For example, starting at the very beginning, creationists and intelligent design theorists make a big deal about the so-called Cambrian explosion, like it's a creative event. Maybe this is Genesis. Maybe this is day 2, because you often see things like the Time magazine cover, the big bang of evolution. Life suddenly sprang into being, almost as if it was a spoken word. In fact, that's not at all the case. There's an abundant pre-Cambrian fossils, but these are microscopic. They're so small they were missed until the 1940s. They're blue-green bacteria, so-called cyanobacteria. They come from rocks 3.5 billion years old, carefully dated through radiometric dating techniques that collaborate each other. And yet they're identical to modern cyanobacteria. From 3.5 billion to 700 million years ago, there was no form of life more complex than a single cell. And the only megascopic fossils you would have found are these dome-like cyanobacteria mats, stromatolites. You can find them at Shark's Bay in Australia, still going today. So for 90% of life's history, this was the planet of the scum. You might ask yourself, what was the Creator doing for the 3.5 billion years waiting to get around to us while he was doing the planet of the scum? It's just an interesting question. By 700 million years ago, we see the next logical step, that is multicellular but not skeletonized, soft-bodied animals known as the Ediacara fauna. Then we see the little shellies that come up, finally hard enough fossils that you could actually pick them up and see them, and they're fairly extensive. These are still long before trilobites. And finally we get to the famous Burgess Shale of hard-bodied animals. These are all the little weird beasties you can get from the shale up in Canada. So in other words, the Cambrian explosion actually took over 20 million years. So when a geologist says it was a sudden event, they mean something very different by the word sudden than you and I mean. So there's nothing creative in terms of a spark of creation or an overnight Genesis kind of event to this. In fact, there's an abundance of transitional fossils throughout the history of life on Earth. Here's a few transitional fossils for whales. This is the Ambulocetus natans here, the second one down. Here he is, full form. And in fact, there's now about a dozen transitional fossils from whales, just for whales, and this is just one of many. Why does this happen? Because of something called adaptive radiation, that is, closely related species diversifying in a short period of time as a result of having adapted to different ecological niches. These are the two and only two iguana species in the Galapagos, the marine iguana on the left, the land iguana on the right. They're both descended from a single common ancestor in South America. They migrated out about 6 million years ago on a big mat or raft of dirt and trees. Adaptive radiation or intelligent design. Okay, so here's the question. Now, Dr. Jacoby was very generous in saying, well, maybe evolution is the way the intelligent designer did it. Okay, maybe. But it's sort of an odd way to create. That is, at what point did the intelligent designer step into our world, and from where is she operating when she's doing this? From outside of space and time? From some other planet? Where does the influence into our world come from to give the spark of creation of life? Now, the Darwinian explanation is that's descent from a common ancestor. This beastie gives rise to all these here. Or as Dawkins said, random mutation plus non-random cumulative selection. The adaptive radiation, in fact, you can see this with human evolution. There's a whole slew of these transitional fossils in our own ancestry going all the way back to 6 million years, through 3 million years, 2 million years, 1 million years, 500,000 years, and back to our most immediate common ancestor in which we lived simultaneously with Neanderthals for a while, and then we won out due to our big brain that had no crayons on the inside of it. So the selective process is that natural selection is operating, which is what drives adaptive radiation, and then we get a process of speciation. So I can't give you I teach an entire 15-week course in evolutionary biology. I can't do it for you in 5 minutes, but I feel like Henry VIII when he told his wives, I won't keep you long. We can't cover the whole thing here, but basically what happens is there's some kind of reproductive isolating mechanisms. There's a barrier that separates two populations, or there's a founder effect here in which one species branches off from another. You get ring species, for example, these different gulls. These can interbreed with these can interbreed with these, and so on, but these cannot interbreed with these. That makes them, by definition, a separate species. And with the larger populations, you have genetic stability, so they remain relatively the same. But with lower numbers in the population, you have much genetic drift and variation, so you can get rapid change like this. And this is, in fact, exactly what we see in the fossil record. So the fossil record is then confirming a modern theory of speciation, which is then collaborated by genetic research. This is the beauty of evolutionary biology. It's convergent. Lots of different lines come together to this one particular conclusion. So a species is a group of actually or potentially interbreeding natural populations reproductively isolated from other such populations. I expect you to remember this on the quiz later today. The whole point of all this is that what is the intelligent design creationists' explanation for all these things? For example, we can scale up from microevolution to macroevolution and see how these things change from genetic change through the fossil record. But how does the intelligent design creationists explain, for example, the problem of incipient stages? That is, how do you get a wing in a Darwinian sequence from a non-wing? And the answer is it's an exaptation. It was once something else. An exaptation is an exadaptation. That is, a character evolved for one function, later used for a different function. In the case of wings, these are all shot on the same day by myself in the Galapagos. Wings for flight from the blue-footed boobies. Wings for, these are the flightless cormorants. They just help them push themselves underwater to eat the moss off the rocks. And then they sort of spread them out to dissipate heat. And then the wings on the only equatorial a penguin, which is a small little guy. So they're used for rudders underwater. So there are 3 different functions of wings. And in fact, when you look at lots of different structures, like the bacterial flagellum that intelligent design theorists are so enamored with, in fact does not have one function. It has multiple 3-part functions, of which one was originally adaptive and the others are exaptive. They're exadaptations. And so for each of these, what is the creationist explanation for this? A spandrel, for example, is an architectural space between 2 arches in which the building is not designed and built so that you could put this little pieces of art in the archway, the space left over from the archway. The arch is there for some other purpose. The archway little thing there, the little space, is used for an artist. Well, the panda's thumb is very much like this. That is, it's not a thumb at all. It's the radial sesamoid bone here. It's the wrist bone. So the paw was designed by evolution for one particular purpose, and then the little bone gets extended in a kind of clumsy way to strip the leaves off bamboos. It's a spandrel. So what would be the creationist explanation? It's not a very intelligently designed structure. It's kind of a clumsy, historical, what's available at the time. So, in conclusion, the whale's flipper, is it intelligently designed or naturally designed? Well, we see, for example, the common bone structure in all tetrapods. It is all vertebrates with legs. They all have the same bone structure. That's either because we all have a common ancestor that we evolved from, or God has some weird sense of humor in which he thinks it'd be really cool to give bats bones like cows have. And to me, that's just not evidence of an intelligent designer. Same thing with the hummingbird and whales. These are not to scale, by the way. And for that matter, vestigial structures like legs in snakes, legs in whales, what would those be there for? The human tailbone, wisdom teeth. Evolutionary biologists have perfectly good explanations for vestigial structures like this. What's the purpose of male nipples? What's the purpose of the human appendix? I wanted to have at least one personal picture in my slideshow, so I gave you that one. That's my appendix there. That's it. She's a beauty. So in conclusion, inorganic design is the result of natural, not supernatural forces, and nobody disputes that. Nobody thinks God came down and gave us crystals. Therefore, all design is natural, from planets to plants to people. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shermer.
Lead somewhere. There's purpose behind all of it. You said again the fossils scream evolution, not creation. I say it's a false antithesis. You talk about emergent properties like consciousness. And because certain properties of life are emergent, therefore we don't need a designer. What does that have to do with it? Whereas you're assuming the thing you're trying to prove here. Simply that emergent properties could have been part of a master plan. Explaining something scientifically is not the same as explaining it away. And these seem to be confused. Methodological naturalism is good, but that does not justify metaphysical naturalism. So your confident statement that no one believes that there's a supernatural involvement, you're confusing together or fusing together methodological and metaphysical naturalism. I think those have got to get separated. God of the gaps, if there's no gap, that doesn't mean that there's no God, even if there are no gaps at all. Even if science seems to explain everything, You have to step back and ask, have we really dealt with the issues here? I like the way Newman put it. I believe in design because I believe in God, not in God because I see design. Teleology, as surely as dysteleology, is a belief. These are both beliefs. And again, I think we're confusing proximate causes with ultimate causes, if we're going to talk about causation. You said, well, the intelligent designer would require a designer, ad infinitum, the infinite regress. I have two problems with that. First is the inconsistency. Because even a secular atheistic scientist, and given that that's about 60% of our scientists would be called atheistic by the polls, not all. I think you exaggerate a bit there, a lot there. But even the secular scientists are talking about the grand unified theory. What will hold together? What can explain the strong and weak nuclear forces, electromagnetism and gravity? That itself is a kind of regress, and it could be an infinite regress, and it's taking an awful long time to figure it out. Besides, you yourself should know, because you say that God, if there's a God, the best argument that theist makes is that he's outside space-time. And so is he outside of time? Why would you say, well, this intelligent designer needs something to create him, that is, to bring him into time? That would contradict your own point. You talk about Francis Collins' book as proving evolution. Well, he talks about evolution, but Francis Collins' book is a book for teleological evolution, and you sound like you're persuaded by it. I was wondering how much you followed it there. What was God doing for 3.5 billion years? God takes his sweet time. What was God doing for 40 weeks while you were being born? He takes his sweet time. You become a Christian, you come out of the water, your character is fully formed, and you never sin again. No, it's a process. God deals with processes. That's his normal way. How large the universe is, how old it is secondary. It's got nothing to do with anything. Then there's the epistemological problem. That is, if our brain is nothing but the result of irrational necessity and chance, this is Plantinga's argument, why do you trust it? Even Darwin, I was reading some of Darwin's autobiography, or one of his letters, this is the hard question. You know, what if my brain is just the result of evolution and therefore disqualified to even make the comments that I'm making? At least for the believer, he says, well, I don't have perfect apprehension of reality, but I believe that God has given me a brain that adequately understands reality. The epistemology of the unbeliever is on very shaky ground. I got an email from an atheist last year. She had watched our debate, which last year centered more on cosmology and morality, as I remember. And she watched our debate. She really enjoyed it. She had a lot of suggestions for me. But she said the creationist argument would be the absolute strongest if you just said, well, evolution's how God did it. That's just his method. And I said to her, well, that is my position. What encouraged me is she said, as long as there's no tinkering in the gaps, the point you made well, starting with Newton, then she said, if I were going to be a theist, I could buy that. And I hope that one day she does. Again, that's my position exactly. You have a colleague at Scientific American. I know you know Kenneth Miller, the cell biologist. And by the way, if you guys don't get Scientific American, get it. And read Michael's column. It'll sharpen. It's a great column. And read Francis Collins's The Language of God. Okay, no more adverts. So what does Miller say? Darwin lifted the curtain that allowed us to see the world as it really is. And to any person of faith, this should mean that Charles Darwin ultimately brought us closer to an understanding of God. I am not persuaded by what you said, that we don't need a God in order to have life on the planet. The evidence doesn't speak, it illustrates that there's a God. It neither proves nor disproves, but it certainly doesn't show that there's...
Well, what are we talking about here? We're talking about, does it have some kind of purpose or goal to it? That depends on how you define purpose and goal. I mean, does the universe have a purpose to... Well, no. I mean, the universe is just a bunch of stars and galaxies. These are just balls of hydrogen converting hydrogen into helium because they hit a certain temperature. They just simply have to do that because that's what they do by the laws of nature. So purpose, when we think of human purpose, that's what we create. We create purpose by what we do, the courage of our actions and so forth. What I think is on the table here is it in some sense inevitable that this had to come about the way it did? That is there some directionality to it? Regardless if you're a young earth creationist or an old earth creationist, or you think it was 6,000 years or 15 billion years, whatever. The idea would be that somehow it knew we were coming, or we were some inevitable result of that. That's what I think is on the table here, and I don't think that. I think that we are truly a cosmic accident, for which we should be truly grateful and spiritual and thankful and so on, like any believer would be, for pretty much the same reason. It's pretty dang unusual, unbelievable that we're here. So that puts to the lie, by the way, the idea that the universe is fine-tuned for us. No, it's not. There are very few places where life can exist, especially complex life like ours. 99.999% of the universe is completely uninhabitable. Most of it's empty space. But even if you discount the empty space and just go for stars and planets, most of them are totally uninhabitable. There's nothing particularly special about our universe. So we're really only talking about one planet out of what is probably going to turn out to be billions, if not trillions, of planets in the cosmos. Surely one out of these, if not many, would be habitable for life just by chance. And that's the anthropic argument. So I don't think you can use that as a gap that needs to be filled by a designer, and that really is what is going on here with Dr. Jacoby's argument. Still, there has to be some place for the creator to close the gap. Even though he's willing to concede the fossil record, the DNA, evolution happens, natural selection, the whole thing, that's the way God did it. Okay, good. On a political level, in terms of like the teaching of good science in American schools, I'm all for, finding some consilience there between us. But that aside, just the science, I still don't see what the need for a creator in whatever gap there may be, unless you want to go all the way back and step outside of space and time, in which case we're not really doing science anymore. I mean, there's not really a way to test that. And so we end up at one of these kind of empty places where the human brain is big enough to think about those questions, but maybe not big enough to answer them. And I often find that adult beverages is the best way to solve those kinds of issues. Because, there are certain things I think we cannot know. But why fill it with a particular, why fill that gap with a particular deity? And so if you're going to do that, which one, by the way? I presume most of you here are Christians, but if you had been born in India, you wouldn't be a Christian. So you would fill it with some other god in the gap. So then we're into the psychology and sociology of religion, and the particular gap you're filling with a particular deity is going to be determined by what your parents believed and what your culture believes and so on. And I think that then we're truly off the page of science and then just talking about sociology and anthropology of beliefs. 4 minutes. 4 minutes to go or 4 minutes to... Yeah, 4 minutes to go, yeah. Oh wait, it was 8 minutes total, so it has to be. Either way, I'm on. I can add.
Science.
So in any case, what can you say about a being that's outside of space and time, right? I mean, we're stuck in space and time. We're three-dimensional or four-dimensional beings if you count time. So how could you possibly know what that would be? So I think the whole program of intelligent design creationism is flawed in the sense that the best you could ever find would be some kind of intelligence capable of genetic engineering, manipulating stem cells into more complex life forms, the kind of stuff we're pretty close to being able to do already. So they would just be like us, but a bit smarter. Maybe they could create planets. Well, we'll eventually be able to do this. This is just an engineering problem of pushing interstellar gas clouds around and causing them to collapse. And I'm not making this up. This is, there's some good science behind this. Terraforming planets, things like this. We will be able to do this. If not in 500 years, 5,000 years, 50,000 years, we will be doing these kinds of things. Think the kinds of things that 100 years ago people would say, well, that's almost a deity kind of thing. It's a divine action. When in fact there's nothing supernatural about it. It's just engineering. You know about the guy with the chip in his brain, the paralyzed, he's a quadruped, and with the chip in his brain, he can control the cursor on his computer. He can do email, he can play computer games just by thinking of thoughts. Now, if you didn't know about the chip in his brain, you'd think, ESP, paranormal. You know about the chip in the brain, that's just normal, that's just technology. Well, that's where we're going. That's all you're ever going to find if intelligent design creationism is successful, is a really smart ET. And that isn't what people of faith believe about their God, that it's just like us but smarter. So there has to be something beyond space and time if you're going to believe And I just don't see how you can deduce that from any kind of scientific worldview. It's just off the page of science, it's metaphysics, and then we're back to the realm of why would you even think that in the first place, that you would fill that particular gap with that particular God? And it gets back to, well, because you happen to be born in this century, in that particular country, raised by those parents in that community. That's why you believe that. And that's not a scientific deduction from a scientific worldview. That's something else. And so I think it's perfectly okay at that point to just say, you know what, I don't know. And I guess that's why I sometimes now call myself a militant agnostic. I don't know, and you don't either. I saw that on a bumper sticker once. So, because I don't know how you could possibly know that for sure. How do you know there's an afterlife? How would you know that? I mean, somebody told you that, but they didn't go there and come back and go, hey, you're not going to believe it. They have fruit there. So you get this from other sources that are not verifiable through science. So you end up with these kinds of metaphysical assumptions for which I truly believe there's no basis to it at all. No, I can't prove there's no God. But I can't prove there's no Bigfoot either. I mean, I can't prove there's no UFOs. There's just lots of things I can't prove. Instead of filling the gap, just leave it open. Just say, okay, you know what? I'm just going to not draw a conclusion on that right now. We'll just leave it open and leave it at that. Life will go on. Life will be fine. Just my challenge to you tonight, and I'll end with this. Just take off the no God glasses. Put on the no God glasses for just 5 minutes, and then try it tomorrow for an hour, and see how it feels, and then try it for a day. See if you can, get through the whole day. There's no God. You'll see nothing happens. Life goes on. You still have morals and values, and you still have friends and family, and the whole system works just fine. So just try it and see how it feels. Thank you.
At this point in time, it's up to you.
It's up to
We
you.
have 30 minutes worth of a question and answer session. Continue. Just to address one concern, ladies and gentlemen. I'm giving the speaker you address 2 minutes to answer the question, and then the opposite speaker a minute to respond. So if you're through with your answer, sir.
I'm done now.
Next question.
Hi, I'm with Gator Free Thought, one of the co-sponsoring student organizations. And as a skeptic, I pose a question to both of you. What sort of new evidence would it take to get you to change your mind?
Dr. Jacoby first.
You mean, what would it take to change my mind
what would we have to discover that would cause
God
you to change your
didn't
mind?
do it through evolution?
You seem to agree both on the facts. I don't think that you've been disagreeing
Yes,
about
the
what
point of
happened.
disagreement is the teleology, the dysteleology. I'm sorry to use such an ugly word. Dysteleology became a word in 1874. It was probably all, because of these kinds of discussions. What would convince me that there's no God? That would be difficult because of the evidence of the resurrection, because of my Christian experience, and more. If you're asking me a different question, then ask me later on. But I'm pretty convinced about the science of this.
A large cash deposit in my name in a Swiss bank account. And the figure is $700 billion. That would do it for me. That would be a miracle.
I don't think that's enough, Michael.
Thank you for your question. Next question, please.
My question is for Dr. Jacoby.
If you could speak into the microphone so that we can hear you, please.
How do you address the fact that you say the facts actually point to intelligent design, yet you provide no evidence of this, and rather you present your position on the basis that we should accept intelligent design unless it's otherwise disproven?
Let me clarify, in case I was speaking too quickly in the opening. I don't think I was. It's all relative. I don't believe in intelligent design at all. That's a technical term that means when there's a gap in the evolutionary sequence, then God, miracle occurs here. I do believe in an intelligent designer, though. That's really a very different subject. I believe that there's a God behind it because I think that's the best explanation for why there is morality, why there is consciousness, why there is intelligence, even why there's meaning. If we were in a meaningless universe, how would it ever possibly occur to us to ask whether this universe has meaning? So those are some of the reasons.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Well,
Yeah, that's my biggest beef, I think, with intelligent design. It's not testable. There's no
Right.
For it to be science, there has to be some set of hypotheses that we can then go back to our labs and test, or go out in the field and dig, or whatever. There has to be some way to get at it. If you can't, then it's not really science. And there's nothing to teach. In any case, the whole thing about should intelligent design creationism be taught in schools, there's nothing to teach. I've challenged them, proponents, give us your curriculum. You know, it's week 15 and you're doing genetics and high school biology. What is it you're going to teach? And they have nothing. They say, well, we'll get back to you on that. You know, it's like, okay, well.
Thank you. Next question, please.
My question is for Dr. Shermer. If you believe that we have evolved from, kind of random activity and that there is no intelligent designer behind us, my kind of question has to do with our moral beliefs and why we kind of have everyone has a certain moral belief, like it's almost widely agreed that, rape is wrong, but if you get down to it, one could possibly argue that rape is a evolutionary trait to help us reproduce. And I feel like without an intelligent designer, like how would you explain all of our moral kind of standards?
Yeah, without God, why be good? Or as some wag said, if there were no God, who would you do? Anyways. So bad. The long answer is that I wrote a whole book on this, Science of Good and Evil, that we are a social primate species. As such, we have to have social mechanisms to get along. One of those is something called reciprocal altruism. That is, I'll scratch your back if you'll scratch mine. That is, we have kind of a social contract. I'll do things for you, you'll do things for me. This doesn't even have to be formal. It doesn't even have to be stated. Most of these, in fact, are not stated. And it's not a big step from there that it's not a moral calculation in some cold, selfish way that, boy, if I'm going to do this for you, but I'm going to calculate and keep track, although some people do. The more closely related you are to somebody and the better you know them, the less it needs to be a moral calculation and just a feeling, an emotion you have. So we have emotions. Emotions are there for something. They're proxies for something else. Almost all emotions involve human relationships and how we get along with other people. The feelings we have of love or jealousy for our significant others, the feelings of trust we have in business relationships or lack of trust. All these are emotions that are expressed in a way to drive behavior, to reciprocate again or to pull back and be non-trusting. This is why diplomacy is always such a delicate game, because we're so tribal. So in conclusion, my answer is that because we're a social primate species, we've evolved two suite or set of moral emotions. One, within our groups, we're pretty altruistic, pro-social, cooperative, nice with those who we are related to and know very well. Between groups, we're pretty xenophobic, tribal, nasty, bellicose, harsh, and so on. And this goes a long way to explaining Old Testament morality, where on one page you have these wonderful moral homilies about treating others, love your neighbor as yourself, and on the next page you're supposed to rape, pillage, and destroy those bastards on the other side of the river because they're the bad guys. That's all in the Bible, and the reason for that is because of that evolved, I think, tribalism.
Dr. Jacoby?
Yeah, briefly, Michael's book, The Science of Good and Evil, does give a credible explanation as to how morality could have come about. However, it confuses the issue, the philosophical, the metaphysical issue. What we say is right and wrong is one thing, but how would anything actually be right or wrong unless there's a reference point outside this cosmos in space-time? And for that, we have to get into metaphysics, and for that, we need to get into religion. And that's, so a good job, I think, on the scientific side, but your book doesn't deal with the actual issues of morality, just how it might have evolved in ancestors.
Thank you. Next question, please.
First, thank you both, Dr. Shermer and Dr. Jacoby, for coming to speak at our humble university. My question is for you, Dr. Jacoby. If design is in fact intelligent from the top down and designed from a being of supreme intelligence, why is it that once we get past our certain biological narcissism that we see that design is so gosh darn unintelligent? That's to say, why do I share the same narrow pathway for food and air? Or why does my urinary tract run through my prostate gland? Where's the intelligence in this?
Now, I think you're confusing two things. Yeah, I think you're right about the urinary tract and the prostate. I'm not talking about that. And Michael's appendix really was impressive. That was amazing. What was the question? I'm sorry, just remind me.
Where's the intelligence in this design?
Yeah, you're confusing two things. And one of those is design. I don't claim that the human body is designed perfectly. It doesn't have to be perfectly designed to be fearfully and wonderfully made. It's like the brain. Your brain's not perfect. It makes mistakes, right? The eye's not designed perfectly, otherwise it wouldn't be upside down, backwards, and have to go through all this other stuff before it gets to the... Okay, but perfect design is one thing, but that doesn't mean it's not intelligent. You take examinations, right? You're a student. It doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to do a perfect exam in order to show that you're intelligent. I think we're confusing two different things. Who says everything has to be optimally designed for everything? If it were, we might live forever. It seems to me that God wants us to die at a certain point. Genetically, it's programmed in. It's not good to live forever in this body. It's not good. I think you're confusing two kinds of perfection. Okay.
Thank you for your question. Next question, please.
Yes, my question is directed towards Dr. Shermer. You asked the question, who designed the designer? Well, I would like you to address what I see as sort of a logical flaw in that. You could look at something designed by a human, like a computer, and say that was obviously had a designer, but who designed that designer, which would require that to be a designer for a human, which you would say is a non-designed thing. How do you address that?
Well, first of all, let me, on the intelligent design of the human body, note that it really is weird that God would have put a waste disposal system right in the middle of a recreational area. I mean, that is weird.
Michael makes comments like these
on this particular one, well, I'm just asking, that's all. I'm just making a few observations. We have vast experience with intelligent creators and designers creating computers. You can go to the Apple production place in India, wherever it is now, and see how the computers are actually made. You can go see the software designers working away there. We have no experience, none, with the artificer of the universe creating planets and stars and so on. All you have is the end result from which you then infer, well, there must be a designer to it. And maybe this is a sign. I take it all back.
Dr. Jacoby?
No, that's good. Okay. You may take it all back. All right.
If we could have the house lights raised just a little. Thanks. Next question, please.
All right. For Dr. Jacoby, I'd like to take issue with your framework of teleological investigation, because I agree that there's a direction to the universe, and the dominant theme is accelerating complexity while pruning some of the threads of nature. If you would agree that we can discover these qualities of the nature of the direction of the universe by studying nature, then what purpose do you have, what utility is there by injecting Christianity into the discourse of trying to understand our universe?
Good question. So when we talk about teleology as accelerated complexity, that's not actually what I'm referring to in this sense.
My opinion.
Yes. So a snowflake builds and up to a certain maximum, but there's an increase in complexity, but that's not the teleology. We're talking about what's actually behind it. And I don't believe that by looking at scientific evidence, we can deduce where we're headed. To really understand, our physical origin, yeah, science can help. But if you want to answer the big questions, the ones that Hitchens stunningly says religion has no answers for, the big questions, where do we really come from? Who are we? Identity. How do we relate to one another? Relationship. What is our ultimate destiny? What is purpose in this world? And is there meaning? These are 6 big questions that science has very little to say. And that's the teleology I'm referring to.
Well, teleology is the direction of the universe, but where do you see the contribution of Christianity to contribute to this investigation?
Yes, let me answer the other part of the question. Because there are 2 books. There's the book of works, there's the book of words. Theologians speak of general revelation and special revelation. General revelation, anyone has access to that. Through science, you can see through history, even sociology will show us, our own experience. It's open to everybody. But special revelation teaches us things we couldn't otherwise have learned. But now we're into a discussion on the Bible itself and God's particular working among a people in the Old Testament period, that is the people Israel. These are special interventions. That's special revelation, without which general revelation is something we can only approximately understand. And for more on that, see Romans 1:18 to 22.
Dr. Shermer, a response?
Yeah, I guess, Doug, on this and the other question about where you get where you deduce the ultimate moral values from, even if I can explain how they came about evolutionarily wise, what's the outside Archimedean point from which you stand to know that this is right and that's wrong? Right. Yeah, good question. How do you know? How do you know? Mm-hmm. I mean, do you pray and God tells you stem cells, bad, abortion, bad? I mean, do you hear the voices like this, or do you read it in the Bible? You know, there's next to nothing in the Bible about abortion. Boy, you really got to read between the lines. Same thing with homosexuality. There's just a couple passages tucked in there between stoning to death disobedient children and stoning to death adulterous women, but not the guys. This is a kind of pick and choose, cherry picking your morality.
That's not true.
So, I mean, if you're going to read it literally, well, you really got to do all the stuff. And so obviously you're interpreting. I'm interpreting, everybody interprets. And unfortunately, the creator of the universe wrote more than one book. There's lots of books that different people on different parts of the planet read as their ultimate text. You may have noticed this in the Middle East. So, what makes you right and the Muslims wrong about certain ways, interpretations, for example, of treating women? Where do you get this? Because they're just as convinced as you are that they're right, that women should be treated as chattel. And you would disagree with that. What makes you right and them wrong? Because they're just as convinced as you are.
If you'd like that response, a brief response.
I don't think the Muslims would be very happy with what you've said. And
well, some do.
Some do, some don't. But we're really jumping all over to different subjects here. But if we're talking about the Old Testament, because you throw this out, stoning to death disobedient children. I have 3 children. My wife and I have 3. We used to have 6, but 3 of them really messed up. So in the Old Testament, and this is only an Old Testament thing, that was because the church was the state. That's because these are people who rejected society, who rejected their parents, who had rejected authority. They rejected everything. They're living profligate lives of drunkenness. I think you have to actually look at the passage. These are people who made a choice themselves. I certainly don't advocate that today. As far as adulterers and adulterers, but both were supposed to be stoned technically in the Old Testament law, Deuteronomy 22. But if you're talking about the Muslims, the Hindus, you're saying, well, if I were born in India, I'd be a Hindu or a Sikh or Jain or something. Well, where were you born? And therefore you believe what you believe. So I guess what we believe, it just really depends on where we're born, so no one's more right than anyone else. So there you go, we have no truth. I know that's not your position because you're a seeker after truth. But if you're going to say that, Indians are Hindus predominantly because they're born in India, what are you really saying? I think you're just stating the obvious. It becomes a tautology. Our beliefs are subject, at least some point, to our free will and our decisions. There are plenty of Indians who've become Christians. There are plenty of Muslims who've become Buddhists or Christians themselves. So it's not purely determined by geography.
One final response, if you have any. But before would you like to respond to anything
I think what'll happen, what happens on a lot of these things, as you say, well, you have to read carefully, you got to know the context and so on. This is exactly what's going to happen to the whole gay rights, homosexual marriage thing. In 10 or 20 years, this will be a non-event. I mean, it'll just be looked at like the black and white drinking fountains that we look at now from the 60s. There's nothing but bigotry against people based on just a couple of passages.
Before we continue, ladies and gentlemen, I just want the people in line to be aware that there is a time cap, and this is not part of the time that we've allotted. But when I do say that we only have a couple more questions left, I truly do mean it. But the speakers are kind enough to stay a few minutes after and address any personal questions that you'd have. So at this time, we have about 10 minutes left. So I think we're on this side now.
Thank you both very much for coming out and speaking. This is a question for Dr. Jacoby. Given the assumption that I believe I can make that macroevolution requires death of some sort. And looking at some of the scriptures where the Apostle Paul says that the wages of sin is death, and some other scriptures that suggest that there was no death before the original sin. My question to you is, do you believe that there was death before original sin, and does this correlate, is this in accordance with the scriptures?
Yes, I think the answer there is that the death that, for example, Paul refers to in Romans 5, that enters the world through one man, and the wages of sin being death, Romans chapter 6, is a spiritual death. The evidence is abundant that there was death throughout the entire history, well, not the whole history of the world. We have the earliest life forms are what, Michael, 3.8 billion years ago, 3.9. But death precedes even man. So death in the physical creation is not linked to the rebelliousness of people. Now, in Romans 8, Paul talks about the whole creation groaning and seeming to be affected by the fall of man. You'll find this in many poetic passages in the Old Testament as well, like in Isaiah. We can't get into that right now. But my short answer would be spiritual death is what we're talking about, not physical.
It's correct. Okay. Next question, please.
My question is for Dr. Shermer. I've spoken with my wife about this at length. It seems to me like everything exists because either space or time allows for it. And under your framework of natural design, my question to you is, how do you explain the design of space by time, which has nothing to do with space, and the design of...
For time, you can't even use that, you can't even ask that question. Now, having said that, as a disclaimer, there are people who do research in this. Paul Davies, for example, is a theoretical physicist, and he's written several books on this that are they're popular books, easy to read. What are the possible origins of space and time? There's half a dozen different theories about where this could come from. For example, Doug mentioned multiple bubble universes that I write about in one of my books. That is, it now appears that a collapsed black hole collapses into a singularity. A singularity is an infinitely dense point. And we now think that that's how the universe began with a Big Bang. It was a singularity. So it's possible that collapsing black holes give birth to new bubble universes. Now, any particular configuration of the laws of nature that would give rise to stars, and stars collapse into black holes, then when it gives birth to new baby universes, they're going to have laws of nature like that give rise to planets and stars and people and so on. So that's sort of a Darwinian cosmology of that. Now, believe me, these are whole books written about this, and I've given it 1 minute, which is hardly fair to the authors, but at least they're making an attempt at an answer.
And this is theoretical physics.
Yeah,
no
well,
one's gone
you got to
there
start somewhere.
Come back. Very theoretical. The interesting thing is that space and time have a beginning at the singularity. Matter and energy have a beginning. And the scientific community believed in the eternity, that is, that matter had always existed. That was believed until around 100 years ago when people started challenging it. And now scientists believe that, no, our universe has a beginning in time. Something like 14 billion years ago. It doesn't matter when it is, it has a beginning. That's radically different to having no beginning. So on this point, Genesis 1:1, in the beginning God created, and astrophysics, quantum physics, everything converges right there. So Big Bang is not your enemy, it's your friend. If you're a believer, Big Bang simply means that there is truly a beginning, and that's why that hypothesis was so vigorously resisted by a few unbelieving scientists. They all had to give in eventually to the evidence.
Thank you for your question. Next question, please.
Okay. Thank you both for being here. This question's for Dr. Shermer. And it may be personal, so I don't know if you'll choose to answer it or not. But I'm just curious because you've talked about God of the gaps, and you're saying, like, don't fill that in with God. But, I mean, at the same time is both a statement like an absolute. He's saying, you know, you may choose to fill that in with God as an idea for an intelligent design, but you're saying don't fill that in. And so I'm just wondering, like, how at one point you described yourself as a Christian, like how you had turned from that to this idea of like not filling it in. So.
Okay, two-part question. The first part, yes, it's true. You don't have to fill it in with anything. I'm saying it's okay to say I don't know. On the other hand, it is okay to try to fill it in with, say, an intelligent designer. So one of the points in my book, Why Darwin Matters, on this is what will you get What will you find if you go in search of an intelligent designer? That is a being of great power and intelligence capable of, creating cells and manipulating genomes and things like that. Well, as I said, we're practically able to do this already ourselves. Give it another 500 years or 5,000, be generous. We'll be able to do all the things that we attribute to God now. So the best you're going to find with that gap is just a really smart ET. The second part of your question was, there's multiple answers. That is, in part I was young, and so it was easy for me to make the transition from being very religious to being non-religious, because my family wasn't religious, so I didn't give up any family. I wasn't married, and I didn't have a community of people that were believers that I would lose and have nothing. So much of that, it makes it difficult for older people to give up their beliefs when they have a whole social network around them. So I was young enough to be able to do that. But that isn't why I did it. That just made it capable of doing it. The reason I did it is simply I just didn't believe the central tenets of Christianity especially anymore. The virgin birth, the resurrection, and so on. And I studied comparative world religions, which really did truly show me the sort of cultural boundedness of religion, and that pretty much what you believe is determined by where you happen to have been born. And I happen to have been born in Southern California, where the evangelical Jesus movement took off in the 70s, and I just got swept up into that, and that's why I believed, and then I just didn't believe it anymore.
Just adding on briefly, the really smart ET, and your books are so readable, they're very enjoyable. I hope many in the audience will get them.
Thanks.
How much are you going to pay me for saying that? That's good, but that just pushes it, that doesn't deal with the question, it pushes it back. This is exactly what Dawkins did in Expelled. It was shocking. Ben Stein says, so how did life come about on Earth? He said, well, maybe it was seeded.
Uh-huh.
Well, okay, well then where did it come from? Again, we're getting into this regress.
Yeah.
And secondly, I think you might be confusing, not you single, you plural, because a lot of people, gaps in knowledge with the big gap. The Pascalian, the gap in our heart. Something's missing, and that something is God. That's different to saying we have a sequence, an evolutionary sequence, and right here it's fuzzy, so we put in a God. I'm not talking about that, and I think there's still people in the audience who think that I'm advocating anytime it's confusing, just call it God. I'm against that. I think that's the wrong methodology. I'm a methodological naturalist, or naturalistic in my methods, but not metaphysically.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, your questions are very important. However, we only have time for 3 more questions. So I really do invite you to come up front after the speech, or after our closing statements, and meet these 2 very intelligent men to ask them a personal question if you have one. So we have one, and then one's back again.
Yeah, I wanted to thank you guys both for coming, but also I want to know, you both talk about purpose to a certain degree, and I want to know, do you really believe that intelligence has a purpose, and if so, where is it derived from?
I think that's for you, Doug.
No, I think that's actually for you.
Okay.
Don't you have a PhD in the history of science?
Well, shucks. Can I call you Doug?
Yeah.
We can settle that by rock, paper, scissors if you
I
like.
can call you Joe.
Does intelligence have a purpose?
I'll be so glad when this election's over. Yeah, well, that was my point. Again, back to what are you going to find when you go looking for an intelligent designer, a really smart ET? I don't see how you could derive anything other than that. Because a being that was capable, say, of being outside of space and time, how am I supposed to discern that? Since I'm a being in space and time. Short of, Doug, what, personal revelation, something
or biblical
from on high, But see, my problem with biblical revelation is I know that this is written by people and edited and redacted over centuries.
Proximate causes, ultimate causes. People are just tools.
Yeah, but we know how fallible people are when they write, and as I said, it's unfortunate that the creator of the universe wrote many books, not just the Bible, but other books. So which is the right one you're supposed to read to get the revelation?
And that's why when I was at Harvard studying world religions, comparative religions, I had a similar experience to you. Wow. But what they emphasized to me there was, look how different they are, not how similar they are, or that they're really all teaching the same thing. They're very different. I think we need to compare religions. We need to compare scriptures. I'm not afraid of that. I think that's a great thing to do. I think the Bible stands head and shoulders above all the other scriptures. And I don't believe they're from God if they contradict each other any more than I think one scientist is right if he contradicts the findings of another scientist. There's got to be a consistency in the book of words also as there is in the book of works.
Thank you. Sir?
Hi, I'm a Christian, and I appreciated the lucidity of both of your presentations. My question is for Dr. Jacoby. The biblical account of creation details 6 days of God working and then 1 day of his rest, and that's the foundation for why the Israelites observed the Sabbath. So whether we interpret the days of creation as literally as days or figuratively as eons, the process, according to the Bible, is still final, finished. But as soon as we accept any level of evolution, species are no longer static. So if God used evolution until now, he still is today. Are we in day 6 of creation?
Okay, partly because of the time. Jesus said in John 5 that the Father is still working even today. So I think to say that, well, the creation process must have been completed with man, even if man's the apex of creation, which it certainly seems he and she is, that doesn't mean that God's not working. The Bible also describes God working and sustaining processes and being very involved in the world. So if not creating means it doesn't do anything, then I think we're getting confused about the meaning of a word. But Jesus said the Father and I are still at work even to this day. John 5. That will be my reply.
Yeah, I guess my problem is if God is using evolution to create things even as we speak, how can you tell the difference between an invisible God who just uses the laws of nature and a non-existent God entirely? They're indistinguishable to me. So why even postulate that? Why even put that out there?
Except that's not what you said in your presentation. You said that the scientific evidence suggests there is no God. Strongly suggests that there's no supernatural world.
No, only that there's no need to fill the gap. I can't prove there's no God. Yes, that's true.
Well, then don't be so dogmatic about what the evidence points to.
But just there are gaps that See, we're there. Now we're stuck at sort of an epistemological dead end. Like, to what extent are you going to make some kind of leap beyond what we know because it fits well with the Christianity you believe or the particular religion that you were raised in, because it feels right or whatever? Then we're into psychology, I think.
Psychology has something to say. I think you're right about that. But we've got a lot to talk about after the debate.
It'll be a very interesting
some things can't be
conversation
done
on the way to the hotel.
in 1 minute. Even if you gave us 3 minutes.
We're going out for a beer afterwards and solve all these things.
Michael said he needs some adult beverages.
If we're not done by 2 a.m., then I'm going home.
Unfortunately, we don't have the venue for that long. However, if you don't mind, Dr.
I don't mind. I'm ready to roll.
Okay. You have one more thing to say?
Closing
Ed?
statement, yeah.
Okay, now I'd like to entertain, I think this is the last question, correct? So after this last question, we'll entertain closing statements from Dr. Jacoby and then Dr. Shermer.
I have a question for Dr. Jacoby. Given that obviously humans are very different from apes, not regarding, given our genetic material, we're very similar, but obviously we have some kind of soul. And that soul somehow houses morality, which the tenets of Christianity are very adamant in upholding. How is it that the physical brain can override that? Say with temporal lobe stroke, people don't know, say if they have their right hemisphere have a stroke, they don't think their left arm is theirs. They think it's their husband's or some random dude. Or with the orbital frontal cortex, when it's damaged, they don't have a moral sense. Why is it that the brain, which is purely physical, can override God's soul?
I wouldn't say the brain is overriding God's soul, but if consciousness is an emergent property, as Michael has argued, then we would have, okay, let's take the great apes. And I won't make any jokes. I'm very tempted right now. But they're farther along the process, so they're more soulish. I think that's actually a word. C.S. Lewis talks about pets. Our dogs. We have a dog. Our dog, I won't tell you her name because it's probably the name of 5 people in the room, but our dog becomes more human by spending time with us. So this shouldn't be surprising if we share a common biological past. It's actually not a problem.
So you're saying dogs have souls?
No, I'm saying they would be better candidates than nematodes
But
or
that's just
annelids.
because we domesticate them.
Well, yes, there's a domestic influence, but there's also a huge biological difference between a dog and a worm. Although sometimes they're connected, which is why you shouldn't always let them lick you.
I'd like to give Dr. Shermer a chance to respond.
Yum. That is a great question. And let me say parenthetically, this is one of the best audiences I've ever been at. You guys are pretty smart. Good questions. And what you're asking is actually even deeper, because behind one of the big arguments for God's existence is consciousness in the moral sense. And as you said, if you destroy a part of the brain, people that get this brain damage, they're no longer moral. They have no sense of right and wrong, which is why we even have written into the law what's called McNaughton's law, the sort of test for whether somebody can plead insanity or not. Did they know the difference between right and wrong? There are plenty of people who don't, simply because of brain damage. So the idea that there's something beyond the material brain, more than just neurons firing. Of course, there are emergent properties from neurons firing, but there's no immaterial stuff in there or floating out there in the ether like Deepak Chopra thinks that we tap into through quantum physics or something. And you know this because of what she said. Stroke patients, brain damaged patients, they lose that function that they used to have, language or the sense of their right arm, the movement of their left leg, their sense of right and wrong, their sense of love and commitment. All this stuff disappears with the brain damage. You take the brain away, that function is gone forever. And so, if it was God that did it, what are you going to derive from the Bible? The Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away? I mean, is that the best we got?
Again, thank you for your questions. Dr. Jacoby, you have the floor for a brief closing statement. You have the floor for a brief closing
Still
statement.
have at the same time we discussed. Yeah. Michael, we both came to faith early in life. You ended up becoming a skeptic, or in the words of Christopher Hitchens, you are the very model of the reformed and recovered Christian fundamentalist. You became increasingly skeptical about the claims of religion, I think in part because you were exposed to some bogus arguments. In How We Believe, in your book you said, in effect, that educated people, especially men, males, often justify their beliefs by rational argument. I think that's right. But surely that applies not only to those who hold religious beliefs, but also to those who hold non-religious beliefs, including yourself. Both of us are here tonight trying to justify our beliefs. I acknowledge to you freely that there are some pretty shabby arguments out there. I hope I'm not making any of them. I know in the past I've made many. And you are right to reject invalid arguments, but there are also good arguments. And some of them are scientific, and some of them are actually metaphysical, getting back into the area of getting into the Bible. It's never too late to reconsider. What would I ask you to reconsider? You say life looks like design because it was, by evolution. Why Darwin Matters, page 65. Again, evolution is not the designer. Evolution is simply an engine. Methodological naturalism does not justify metaphysical naturalism. Got to get clear on that. Teleological evolution itself is a belief. If we're going to be neutral, let's be neutral. Let's not be against teleological purposes, teleological evolution. The opposition between science and faith is logically and theologically unnecessary. Unnecessary. Please impress this on your friends, your colleagues, particularly Mr. Dawkins, Dennett, Harris, and Hitchens, because I think they're confused about this. Evolutionary creation, the position I'm representing this evening, is not necessarily God of the gaps. And again, no gaps doesn't mean there's no God. We have to step back. We've got to look at the big picture. Why is there anything at all? Why are we even here to ask the question? The following anecdote is beyond all doubt fictional, but I'll share it again anyway. One day, a group of scientists got together and decided man had come a long way and no longer needed God. So they picked one scientist, go and tell God, we're done with you. Scientists walk up to God and said, we've decided we don't need you. We're at the point where we can now clone people. We can move around planets. We've said, but we can do many miraculous things. Why don't you go and get lost? And God listened very patiently and kindly to the man. And after the scientist was done talking, God said, very well, how about this? How about this? We're going to have a man-making contest. The scientist replied, great. And God said, we're going to do it just like I did in the old days. And the scientist said, no problem. And he bent down and he grabbed a handful of dirt. And God said, no, no, no. You get your own dirt. All we're doing is walking in the footsteps of God. We're not disproving anything. I close in the words of Francis Collins, the preeminent scientist in our country. It's time to call a truce between the escalating war between science and spirit. The war was never really necessary, like so many earthly wars. This one was initiated and intensified by extremists on both sides. The God of the Bible is the God of the genome. He can be worshipped in the cathedral or in the laboratory. His creation is majestic. It's awesome. It is intricate and beautiful, and it cannot be at war with itself. Only we imperfect human beings can start such battles, and only we can end them.
Dr. Shermer, 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, everybody. I had a good time. I'm glad I came. And again, thank you, Andrew, and Access and the university for bringing this in. I mean, you'd have to... accent.
That's just your accent. That's all. It's fine.
Got to get the name of the sponsor right. I mean, you'd have to be made out of wood to not be interested in these kinds of questions. They are utterly fascinating and, of course, deeply important, which is why I do this. And so, as for the dirt, Doug, I've seen Penn and Teller do things like that. So I wouldn't attribute what looks like magic to a deity, just in case it might be a really good magician instead of a really good E.T. And so, again, that's just another part of that gap argument. Now, a couple of points in closing. I think in terms of the effects of religion, what religion does for people and all that, we've touched on that here a few times. I think religion is good when it does good, it's bad when it does bad. What concerns me about belief is not the particular details of somebody's theology about what they think of the origins of the Big Bang or the bacterial flagellum or something like that. What worries me about belief is what it causes people to do behaviorally, politically, tribally against other people. That's where it gets dangerous. So to the extent that beliefs matter, and they do, then we have a commitment to the truth because it leads to people doing things that sometimes are good and sometimes are bad. And of course, that's true for all belief systems, not just religion. I think a couple other points there. Doug and I are certainly in agreement that if evolution's the way God did it, then I'm on board with that. That's okay. I mean, the more, I think, conciliatory approach we can have between science and religion and between any groups, the better, because of the dangers we have of exterminating our own species at this point. It concerns me much more than the particular details of a debate on DNA or something like that. So to that extent, I'm glad to see you making the points you do, and I'll pass along your sentiments to Messrs. Dawkins, Dennett, Hitchens, and Harris, the law firm of atheism and... I mean, in an odd way, atheism isn't even a thing to be. It's just, I just don't believe in God. That's it. Atheism is not a set of tenets you adhere to. You know, like they give the Atheist of the Year award every year. I mean, who does that go to? The person that didn't believe the most for the whole year? Ooh, I had a moment of doubt in February, but ooh, I got past it. So don't confuse. Atheism is not a belief. There's something else. You have to be for something. You have to be in favor of human values and life and pro-sociality and altruism and taking care of each other and freedom of speech and these kinds of things. And these are the sorts of things that we can share, these kinds of democratic values in a free society that we live in. We can share without being in conflict. So I think we're on board with that. So I'm going to close with just the final 2 paragraphs from Why Darwin Matters about what I think science offers us. If not ultimate value, certainly something I think transcendent and spiritual in its own way. So what science tells us is that we are but one among hundreds of millions of species that evolved over the course of 3.5 billion years on one tiny planet among many orbiting an ordinary star, itself one of possibly billions of solar systems in an ordinary galaxy that contains hundreds of billions of stars, itself located in a cluster of galaxies, not so different from millions of other galaxy clusters, themselves whirling away from one another in an accelerating, expanding cosmic bubble universe that very possibly is only one among a near infinite number of bubble universes. Is it really possible that this entire cosmological multiverse was designed and exists for one tiny subgroup of a single species on one planet in a lone galaxy in that solitary bubble universe? It seems unlikely. Yet herein lies the spiritual side of science, its scientuality, if you'll pardon an awkward neologism, but one that echoes the sensuality of discovery. If religion and spirituality are supposed to generate awe and humility in the face of the Creator, what could be more awesome and humbling than the deep space discovered by Hubble and the cosmologists, and the deep time discovered by Darwin and the evolutionists? Darwin matters because evolution matters, and evolution matters because science matters. And science matters because it is the preeminent story of our age, an epic saga about who we are, where we came from, and where we're going. Thank you.